Today we're going to talk about, I mean, I don't know who Popp is, but apparently this was a solid video on Marcellus Williams. We can use this as an anchor to cover the story. Let's take a look.
Currently awaiting execution. 7 years ago, the DNA on the murder weapon was finally tested and proved it was not his.
Whoever handled this knife left DNA. It is not Marcellus Williams.
His execution was stayed by the then governor, and a panel was convened to reassess his conviction.
Today, a panel will work to decide if that evidence proves Williams is innocent.
So, why is he still here?
How innocent do you have to be to avoid being executed?
This is an injustice, it's wrong. The evidence shows my dad is innocent.
The closer you get to execution, the stranger things get.
This interview remains the only one Marcellus has been able to give on camera from death row.
Right now, as you see, I'm sitting in prison on death row.
My friend Noah did it 6 years ago while working on a documentary about Marcellus' son's boxing career.
He's aspiring to be the champion. I believe he feels that if given a chance, he will be the heavyweight champ.
I'm his only child, his son. I'm a professional fighter, but I've been fighting my whole life outside the ring.
Because of the fighting outside the ring, his boxing career was cut short, and as such, so was Noah's documentary. Fast forward 6 years later, Marcellus is still in death row. Noah comes to me with the work he's done so we can make this piece that you're watching right now. Noah gave me a rundown of what he was able to capture over the time he was working on his documentary.
Sat down with him for a few hours and just talked. And from there, just started diving in.
And then I flew to Missouri to follow up and to figure out what has been happening since he sat down with Marcellus.
How can this happen with so much evidence? What do you mean? This is America. All of the violence that we contribute to globally, we also do to ourselves on a regular basis. He's a black man in Missouri. That's it. What's the Mother Jones journalist's name that I've covered here before? I met him at, no, not Cat. No, the dude, the black dude, Garrison. Yeah, Garrison Hayes. So Garrison Hayes had a really good TikTok on not Marcellus Williams, but hold on here. I'm gonna pull up something that I thought was very instructive and informative. Okay, and I'm just gonna let Garrison Hayes explain this to you. Okay. Now, before we get to Marcellus Williams, okay, what we need to talk about is the way that black people are treated in the criminal justice system. And the way that that treatment is defended by racist pieces of shit with cherry-picked data points and also false presentation of reality. Charlie Kirk applies one of the classic examples of this in this Jubilee video. I didn't even see this part, I don't think. Okay, I don't even remember this part, but I just wanted to, like I said, give voice to Garrison Hayes in this circumstance because he did a pretty decent job going through some of these white supremacist talking points and what the actual reality is. And the actual reality of the matter within white supremacy in the criminal justice system is actually perfectly demonstrated by the current unjustifiable execution of an innocent man in the state of Missouri that we are, we're about to experience in the next couple of hours.
It's about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are black.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do. They commit more murders, they commit more arsons, they commit more kidnappings. For example, blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Okay, let's talk about it. These are obviously racist claims, but I will respond to them as if Charlie Kirk were a reasonable person.
Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are black.
Wrong. Just 38% of America's prison population is black. That's according to the U.S. government. But it makes you wonder why Charlie feels the need to add an additional 12% to the black prison population. Could it be because his bigoted talking points only work if he exaggerates them? If Charlie were actually looking for the race that makes up half the prison population in the U.S., he'd look no further than white people at 57%.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do.
Wrong. The word "so" is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes.
He's saying "so" as in therefore, as in one could conclude, but Charlie knows he's lying. Even if he hadn't just lied about the black prison population, Charlie is smart enough to know that correlation does not equal causation, but he's hoping that you don't know that. So he deploys the word "so" to make you think he's coming to an obvious conclusion.
So blacks...
Instead, he's making an illogical, racist leap. Charlie knows that we don't have usable data about who commits crimes. It's impossible to have that data since so many crimes go both unreported and or unsolved. Charlie knows that we only have data about arrests and convictions. I'll come back to that data in a moment. What's painfully obvious is that Charlie Kirk isn't interested in understanding the statistics he so carelessly misquotes. He's interested in making bad faith arguments. Something that becomes even more obvious in his next point.
Blacks are 13% of the population, and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Wrong again, and loud this time. If Charlie were interested in honesty, he would have mentioned the other 1350 statistic. Yes, black people are about 13% of the population, but make up 53% of all criminal exonerations. In fact, black people make up 55% of all murder exonerations. Specific, black people are more likely than any other group in this country to be convicted of crimes they did not commit. And then people like you have the nerve to parade these stats around as though they prove something. The reality is that you probably know these stats, but you leave them out on purpose, because to bring that stat into this conversation would make some people think. And that's the last thing a person like you wants.
I disagree. I think he doesn't know those stats. But if he did, he also wouldn't mention them. But the reason why I obviously wanted to talk about this is because you have another real life example of an innocent black man who is going to be executed when virtually everyone understands that he is not guilty of the crime that he is about to be executed for. Okay? It is an unfortunate, unimaginable cruelty that happens quite frequently in this country. It's one of the major reasons why I routinely talk against capital punishment, against the death penalty. And yet here we are in the United States of America doing it all over again.
An unbelievable story that has to be heard, and one that is still hard to comprehend once you take it all in. It's one littered with stunning revelations and broken promises, and one that puts Missouri's years-long fight against overturning wrongful convictions directly in the spotlight. All right, before we get into the rest of the story, I just wanted to take a minute to say thanks for being here. This video you're about to watch is the culmination of months of work and years of work by a friend of mine before that. None of this would be possible without you and without today's sponsor, Delete Me. The amount of information out there on everyone in this video and everyone that I research regularly is kind of alarming, all available at just a few clicks. The same actually goes for my own, which I kind of found out about after running Delete Me's thorough
I'm literally gonna let him run his ad, Chad. Come on. This is a fucking
search. Months ago, I had personally sent emails
this is a very well thought out
from certain sites I found it on.
This is a very well thought out piece of journalism that this person has put together. I think it's appropriate.
More from data brokers that didn't even know existed. These profiles included things like social security numbers, recent addresses, information about my relatives, and a lot more. The first search they did here reviewed 2,000 listings and removed dozens of them on my behalf. Not only that, but they're going to routinely check to make sure my information isn't getting onto new sites and to new data brokers. And if it does, they're going to remove it on my behalf. On top of sponsoring this video, they're offering anyone who signs up 20% off using the link in the description below. Just go to joindeleteme.com/CoreyPopp and use promo code CoreyPopp at checkout for that 20% discount. If you're someone who worries about who has access to your data and what they might do with it, including harassment and identity theft, then let Delete Me take care of that for you. Now, let's get back to the story. On August 11th, 1998, Felicia Gale, a 42-year-old former reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, was brutally murdered in her home in St. Louis, Missouri. She had been stabbed over 40 times.
The knife lodged in her neck in a burglary.
A murder that had happened just 24 days before. Another woman, Deborah McLean, was murdered in her kitchen with a knife taken from the home, an eerily similar scene to Felicia Gale's murder. The investigation languished for months, despite the similarities between.
They claimed that it was a burglary. That part is important because it ties it back to Marcellus Williams.
The two murders, the knives being left at both scenes, there being bloody footprints in Gale's house. The police had little to go on, No eyewitnesses, no leads for either. Then, a year later, there was a break in the Gale case. It came in the form of a man named Henry Cole, a jailhouse informant who had said his cellmate had confessed to the murder. That eventually led to the arrest of Marcellus Williams, who was charged with Gale's murder. McLean's murder remains unsolved to this day, but Marcellus was in lockup, so he couldn't have done it. The case against Williams for Gale's murder was largely circumstantial.
This was a very brutal murder of a woman who was found in her home, having been stabbed to death. There were bloody footprints at the crime scene, fingerprints, hairs found in the victim's hand, none of which matched Marcellus. Those were not his bloody footprints, those were not his hairs, and the fingerprints were destroyed.
The state's prosecution relied heavily on the testimony of two informants who had been incentivized to testify.
The only evidence they used to convict him is what we call incentivized informant testimonies. Individuals who came forward because they had something to gain.
The first was Cole.
So Marcellus had been in the workhouse, and someone who was incarcerated with him hears there's reward money and essentially says, I want this reward money and I want help with my own case, and says he won't even testify until he gets that reward money.
The second was Williams' former girlfriend, Laura Sorrow.
In addition, there's another individual, a woman who Marcellus was known to affiliate with. Notably, the two of them contradict each other in what they say would have happened and contradict physical evidence that's found at the crime scene.
The key piece of evidence brought against him was Gale's laptop, which he was said to have sold.
The last piece of evidence that they use is a laptop that had been taken from the victim's house that Marcellus did sell. But what wasn't presented at trial was that the woman that had come forward and said she had information and manufactured these statements about Marcellus is the person who gave him that laptop. And so it wasn't allowed to come out that really the only connection to the crime is this informant and not Marcellus Williams.
There were even eyewitnesses who had said they had seen Asaro with the laptop while Marcellus was still in county.
Usually in death penalty cases, the evidence of guilt is overwhelming, and the only real issue you can litigate in most cases is whether the death penalty was appropriately given. This case was different in that the evidence that they used to convict him was pretty thin and questionable.
All of this should have been easy to poke holes in for most attorneys, but these problems continued at trial. Since his conviction, Williams has argued in several motions that he received ineffective counsel during the trial, which came from a public defender assigned to him. It's no secret that America's public defender system has been stretched to its breaking point, but nowhere near as much as Missouri, which ranks 49th in the country in spending on indigent defenses. In 2017 alone, 320 public defenders handled 80,000 cases in the state of Missouri. The state has repeatedly vetoed bills that would supply funding to help alleviate this caseload.
The Missouri State Public Defender System is asking.
Yeah, this case is particularly unique because the prosecutor that convicted Williams is a prominent figure pushing for his sentence to be vacated. This never happens unless an error is particularly egregious on behalf of the prosecutor. Another similar case is in Texas with the person on death row being a white man, where it's not the prosecutor necessarily, but the main detective, the lead investigator, that is also pushing to vacate his sentence as well. Yes, this is literally every single person involved in this court case is now aware of Marcellus Williams' innocence. Every single person, okay? It is insane that this is even a point of contention, and the only person who could stop this from happening right now is the governor. The victim's family is obviously defending the innocence of Marcellus Williams. I believe jurors themselves have come out and been like, we made the wrong decision given the information that we had at the time. He is innocent. The only person who can pardon Marcellus Williams and stop him from being executed by the state is the governor of Missouri. The problem, however, is that the governor of Missouri yesterday came out and said he will not stop this execution.
For more taxpayer money. They say thousands of defendants are...
No, Biden cannot stop this execution. He could call the governor and tell him to stop this execution. He could use the bully pulpit, but he cannot directly, legally stop this execution. This is a state-level crime, okay? In the United States of America, the president can pardon crimes only at the federal level. The only person who can stop this is the current governor of Missouri.
waiting lists because the office does not have enough attorneys to represent them.
It leaves people like Williams with inadequate counsel and inevitable outcomes like wrongful convictions.
Preparing a case for trial takes hundreds of hours if done properly. And if not done properly, then we end up with all these wrongful convictions.
At jury selection, Marcellus ended up with a mostly white jury when the prosecution struck 6 of the 7 qualified black jurors. When the trial was over, despite the questionable witnesses and the evidence being all circumstantial, they deliberated for less than 90 minutes before finding him guilty. There's something in the U.S. judicial system called a Batson challenge that is supposed to prevent the prosecution from striking qualified jurors on the sole ground of group bias. In this case, race. This was a black man being tried by an almost entirely white jury for a white woman's death in Missouri in the 1990s. When Marcellus' defense tried to argue Batson in a 2003 motion, the state indicated that the jurors were struck because the prosecution stated their clothing indicated they were trying to be different. But that was reason enough and not racially motivated, so Batson didn't apply. For years, Marcellus pleaded his innocence. His case was taken up by multiple different legal teams who fought tooth and nail to finally get the DNA that they had found on the knife properly tested. It turned out to be another man's profile.
There is a DNA testing statute in the Missouri law, but it's real narrowly written, so we just had to make that request and a broader claim of that he was innocent, or there's enough doubts about his innocence that he shouldn't be executed, and we can prove it if you let us do this further DNA testing.
It's not always a weapon like in Marcellus's case where it's left in the victim's body. That's a incredibly obvious piece of evidence. To know that wasn't tested was just shocking. It just blew my mind. Don't you think you should?
Wouldn't this ruin the governor's reputation in future election along with the resulting in his local protesting against him? What are you talking about? Nobody gives a shit. It's another innocent black man being executed. It happens all the fucking time in the United States of America, and the U.S. Supreme Court genuinely loves continuing with these executions on a regular basis. No, it happens all the fucking time. According to Slate, we are currently witnessing the worst execution spree in 3 decades. Okay, this was written on September 23rd, 2024, yesterday. This week is shaping up to be a very bad one for death penalty opponents in the United States. If all goes according to plan, states will put 5 people to death in a 1-week span ending Thursday. That is an unusual, though not unprecedented, number of executions in such a short period of time. To understand just how unusual it is, consider that in 2023, the total number of executions for the entire year was 24. Less than 1 execution every other week. In 2022, 18 people were put to death for a rate of roughly 1 execution every 3rd week. Indeed, one would have to go back almost 3 decades to 1997 to find a parallel to what may unfold this week. During a 7-day period in May that year, Texas executed 5 people. South Carolina executed Khalil Allah, formerly known as Freddie Owens, in his first executions of 2011. The others are planned for Tuesday and Thursday in Texas, Missouri, Alabama, and Oklahoma, all of which regularly carry out executions. It is just a coincidence that all these states are moving in lockstep, coincidence or not, or a close look at each of the cases in which some will be executed this week highlights not just the kind of horrible crimes that can lead someone on death row, but also many of the penalty's crippling problems. This week's executions include 2 cases in which there are substantial doubts about whether that person being executed is actually innocent. 2 others illustrate the fact that the death penalty is often used against people who are poor, vulnerable, abused, in many ways broken, not against the worst criminals. The 5th highlights America's futile search for a method of execution that will be safe, reliable, and humane, which is, of course, ironic to say. Ridiculous, an oxymoronic statement. Looking for a method of execution that is safe, reliable, and humane. Every aspect of the capital punishment, from the methods used to how you are going to deploy this execution in a consistent manner, is completely broken. It's a fundamentally contradictory argument, okay? The fact that 3 of the 5 people who will be executed this week are black only underlines the continuing salience of race in determining who gets sentenced to death and executed. All told, this week's execution spree should unsettle all Americans, whether or not they support the death penalty. It will offer further reasons for why capital punishment should be abolished everywhere in this country. To see why, let's start with last Friday's execution of Khalil Allah. He was convicted of the 1997 murder of Irene Granger Graves, a single mother of 3 who worked as a convenience store clerk. No physical evidence connected Allah to the crime. The key evidence against him was testimony from his co-defendant, Stephen Golden, who said Allah shot Graves. Golden did so after reaching a deal with the prosecutors that he would not be given a death sentence in return for his testimony. Allah maintained his innocence from the time he was arrested to the day he died. And just before South Carolina put him to death, new evidence came to light suggesting what he had been saying for years was true. Last Wednesday, Golden recanted his testimony and signed an affidavit saying, Freddie Owens is not the person who shot Irene Graves at the Speedway on November 1st, 1997. Freddie was not present when I robbed the Speedway that day. But neither the South Carolina Supreme Court, the state's governor, nor the United States Supreme Court moved in a way that would save Allah from the ultimate punishment for a crime he may not have even committed. On Tuesday, which is today, Missouri is going to follow through on the execution of Marcellus Williams, the reason why we're talking about this to begin with, who is another victim of a miscarriage of justice. He would be the third death row inmate executed in the state this year. As Newsweek votes, Williams was convicted of murder and sentenced to death in connection with the 1999 death of social worker and former journalist Felicia Gale. None of the physical evidence collected at the scene pointed to Williams. There's also, as we said, recent DNA evidence that shows that his DNA was not on. Like the DNA matched with the knife on the scene of the crime lodged in the neck of the victim did not have his DNA. As Newsweek notes, Williams was convicted of murder and sentenced to death in connection with the 1998 death of social worker and former journalist Felicia Gale, even though there was no physical evidence that connected him to the scene of the crime. Remember, a knife attack is a deeply personal form of, obvious, insane, violent crime, okay? But due to the personal nature of the crime itself, it is virtually impossible to not leave any DNA at the scene of the crime, okay? Impossible. So while forensic evidence oftentimes can get things wrong, this is one of those instances where if he was at the scene of the crime, he would have left some kind of evidence. Williams' connection, like Allah's Newsweek suggests, turned on the testimony of two unreliable witnesses who were incentivized by the promises of leniency in their own pending criminal cases and reward money. Eventually, even the prosecutor's office that originally brought the case against Williams asked the courts to stop the execution today that is going to happen. The prosecutor's office, okay, that right there is insane. Like, that is not a thing that ever happens unless it is so obvious that they fucked up. Texas plans to execute on Tuesday Travis Mullis, making him the fourth person the state has executed in 2024. Mullis was found guilty of capital murder in 2011. He was accused of sexually assaulting his 3-month-old son, Elijah Mullis, then stomping his head and choking him, resulting in death. No one contends that Mullis is innocent of that horrible crime, but his case shows the way that America's death penalty is used against troubled and vulnerable people. Mullis has a mental illness resulting from troubled and abusive childhood. His attorneys say that he was in and out of mental health treatment centers, diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Mullis was also ill-served by his lawyers in the original trial, who did a poor job of describing the depths of his mental illness. As a result, the jury heard just a fraction of the horrors in Mullis's life. Like with Mullis, if Oklahoma goes ahead with his plan to kill Emmanuel Littlejohn on Thursday, it will execute someone who was abused throughout his childhood and whose formative years were marked by frequent exposure to violence and drugs. Littlejohn was 20 years old when he murdered Kenneth Mears during a robbery. His lawyers contend that because of the abuse he suffered at the time of the killing, Littlejohn's brain was less developed than the typical 20-year-old's. In addition, they note a death sentence in a case with similar facts hasn't been handed down in more than 15 years. Those facts convinced a majority of the members of the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board to recommend that the governor commute Littlejohn's sentence. Finally, this week, Alan Eugene Miller is scheduled for a second trip to Alabama's death chamber. In 2022, the state failed to complete its first execution attempt using lethal injection when they were unable to access a vein. They tried to kill him in 2022. They failed to do so, and now he's back in. I feel like even in medieval times, it's like if you were able to evade certain death by the executioner, like you probably should get a fucking, you probably should not be executed, I don't know. Miller joined a long list of people whose executions by lethal injection were seriously botched. Now Alabama plans to kill him using nitrogen hypoxia. They're going to suffocate him to death. It would only be the second time that this method has been used anywhere in the country. The first time was in January of this year when Kenneth Smith was executed. It did not go well. Witnesses say Smith suffered greatly. 5 executions in 7 days will give America a vivid picture of what happens when the state kills. We should take this opportunity to consider whether we want to continue using unreliable methods of execution, risking killing people who just might be innocent, or are the victims of abusive childhoods or mental illness, or who get a death sentence because of their race or the race of their victims. A lot of people mistake justice for vengeance. Justice is not vengeance. The goal of the justice system is to ensure that these crimes do not happen again, okay? Killing someone is not justice. It's simply vengeance. That's it. That's it. And it completely goes against the principle behind the criminal justice system. I have always been an opponent of the death penalty, of capital punishment. I find it to be truly unconscionable. I think it's like yet another glaringly obvious example of the hypocrisy demonstrated by people who claim to be pro-life. It is completely unacceptable. It is barbaric. And the fact that it still exists in the United States of America, which is a standalone country, by the way, in comparison to other OECD nations, is ridiculous. But we are a truly barbaric nation, okay? We are an incredibly draconian nation. Our attitude towards punishing crimes is insanely out of whack. The goal of the criminal justice system is supposed to rehabilitate people who have done horrifying things, okay? No matter how wrong those crimes may be, you should not stray away from your overarching goal of rehabilitating every single person. Now, there are certain instances where at least modern medicine is incapable of truly rehabilitating certain people that have conducted certain crimes, okay? But that should not stop us from trying to find active solutions, adequate solutions to these problems. It does not mean that someone who has killed a baby after raping them gets to walk away free, okay? That is not the argument here. That is not the argument at all. But the argument should be that every single person, because the overwhelming majority of people that are currently in prison are not there for raping and killing a fucking baby, okay? If you're anti-murder, you absolutely should be anti-murdering people in the hands of the state. That's lib shit, says socialist conscience. Yeah, it's liberalism to say that state-sanctioned murder is wrong. I know. Well, I guess I'm a fucking lib then. Except it's not lib shit. Liberals love this too, okay? Most liberals don't give a fuck about this kind of thing. Why can't we just put down the criminal subhuman scum? Well, here is the reason why we shouldn't do that. Because 55% of black people comprise 55% of all people that are unjustifiably put forward as perpetrators of murder. Don't you consider that to be a significant wrong? A lot of people get falsely claimed of crimes that they did not commit. What are we talking about? Out of those who are incorrectly convicted of murder, 55% of them happen to be black. Since 1973, at least 200 people have been executed in the U.S. who were later exonerated, most of which could have been exonerated before their deaths, and some of them were and were still executed. And those are only the instances that we know of with conclusive evidence of their innocence. What's really funny about a lot of liberals is they love talking about how racist Donald Trump is and even point to fucking the Central Park 5 execution ad that Donald Trump took out on the New York Times, but then fail to consider that they're behaving in the exact same way. The same principle exists here.
You should test it before you execute this man. Went through the evidence. I produced my analysis, which was pretty simple. There was a clear male profile on the handle, not Marcellus Williams. To me, that seemed sufficient to reopen the case.
This went on for months without any movement. No evidentiary hearings, no chance to present this new evidence. Then, at the last minute, just hours before his execution, the Governor Eric Greitens decided to stay his execution.
Marcellus Williams would be dead tonight without Governor Eric Greitens issuing a stay of execution.
Marcellus remembers that day.
I was like maybe a couple of hours away from being executed. I actually seen the execution team go into the little room, with their little materials. I had already came to grips with that.
In staying the execution, Greitens cited the new DNA evidence and assigned a board of retired judges to convene and make a decision on if Marcellus deserved a new trial.
Governor Greitens will appoint 5 retired judges to the panel to review Marcellus Williams' case, including that new DNA evidence.
Everyone was hopeful.
It's looking way better than it was before. Anything better than him facing death penalty. So now he getting the chance and the shot he needed.
Yeah, by the way, the changes to the Democratic Party's criminal justice platform you may have missed is, for example, there is no mention of police brutality in the 2024 platform as opposed to the 2020 platform that did talk about police brutality. And beyond that, they've also removed language on working towards abolishing the death penalty. At what time is he supposed to be executed? In an hour and 20 minutes. Yes. They're the GOP, but just gay now is correct. Yes, that is what the Democratic Party has become. Gay GOP. That'll go away soon too, though. They'll just become full-blown GOP. You know, they'll do away with that too. Don't worry, it's coming.
For them to look over the DNA evidence.
But the sentiment was short-lived because what happened following that was nothing short of stunning. The board of inquiry is something unique to the state of Missouri. It's a law that's been rarely invoked, and each of the few times it has yielded bizarre results. In the late 90s, the then Governor Mel Carnahan issued a stay of execution and invoked the board of inquiry to look into the case of William Theodore Boliak Jr. Carnahan then died in a plane crash, and because of the wording in his stay, Boliak remains on death row to this day, with his execution being forever stayed. In Marcellus's case, the board of inquiry that then Governor Eric Greitens requested to convene did in fact meet. It was the first movement in a while and gave him and his legal team hope.
Are you hopeful now with this board required?
I'm hopeful, but I don't believe or trust in the judicial system. But I'm hopeful that some good will come out of it one way or another. And I'll just leave it at that.
Marcellus's hesitation here, born of a lengthy and complicated legal process that had kept him behind bars for years, proved to be prescient. This hope was indeed short-lived because as the board began to meet, something happened.
Missouri Republican Governor Eric Greitens once considered...
Yeah, the only other group that could potentially halt the execution is the U.S. Supreme Court, which it, of course, as of literally 5 minutes ago, declined to halt the execution of Missouri death row inmate Marcellus Williams, knowing full well of his innocence. A lot of people will be like, oh, I don't understand. Like, what's the purpose here? Like, what's the reason? It's because they're bad people. They're evil people, and they like doing evil shit. That's it. There's literally no other justification for this, okay? It's because they are evil people. The Supreme Court loves it. They love defending the execution of black men. There is no other way to fucking point to this reality. Just literally, if you know anything about the United States Supreme Court, you know this, okay? They do this all the fucking time. Specifically, intellectually disabled black inmates. They love that shit. Yeah, Antonin Scalia, they say it out loud. Mere factual innocence is no reason not to carry out a death sentence properly reached. I repeat, mere factual innocence is no reason not to carry out a death sentence properly reached. Okay? A miscarriage of justice is not a miscarriage of justice at all as long as the death sentence was properly reached. It does not matter. We will execute innocent people as long as the court proceedings were properly conducted. I mean, if you think that that is the worst thing that Antonin Scalia has said, that's Antonin Scalia, who has justified the use of torture in the United States Supreme Court by pointing to 24, a fictional work, by claiming that if there was a terrorist that wanted to nuke DC, like in the television show 24, and torture was the only method to get the information out of him, of course you'd be pro-torture. Or Antonin Scalia, who also once famously made the slippery slope argument about gay people getting married. If gay people can get married, then what's next? What if they want to marry dogs? That is literally, both of those things are things that Antonin Scalia said and did and defended, positions that he said and publicly defended in dissent. And you can learn about this in an introductory constitutional law class, as I did when I was in college.
The rising star in the GOP has just resigned this afternoon amid an impeachment effort sparked by a pair of scandals.
Today, I am announcing that I will resign as governor of Missouri, effective Friday, June 1st at 5 p.m.
When former Missouri Governor Eric Greitens issued that stay, he impaneled a special board to examine the facts of the case and make a recommendation. But then a personal scandal forced Greitens out, leaving the board in jeopardy and the future of Marcellus Williams entirely unclear.
The governor who succeeded Greitens, Mike Parsons, came in as someone tough on crime, which caused many to believe the board was in jeopardy.
I remember CBS coming into town saying, what's going to happen with Marcellus Williams? Will you keep the Board of Inquiry still intact? And he said, I'm going to let them do what Greitens set them up to do.
Now, if you think Governor Parsons is a man who doesn't utilize the pardon power, well, you'd be wrong. He has utilized the pardon power. The governor of Missouri, Governor Mike Parsons, I almost called him Mike Pardon. It's just, he doesn't like to use it against certain people. Here is Missouri governor pardoning the St. Louis couple who aimed guns at protesters during the Black Lives Matter protests. If you recall, Mark and Patricia McCloskey, who gained prominence for confronting demonstrators, had each pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge. They were pardoned. The Missouri governor shortens the DWI prison sentence of former Chiefs assistant coach Britt Reed. Missouri Governor Mike Parsons on Friday shortened the prison sentence of former Kansas City Chiefs assistant coach Britt Reed for a drunken driving crash that seriously injured a 5-year-old girl. Yeah, you don't have to make this shit up. They give you plenty of evidence, okay?
I know the board was canceled. Will they meet? Will they make a recommendation to you? And what will you do then?
I would assume they would. I heard they're not going to. So I think once they make that recommendation, if they do meet, then we'll discuss that at the time.
And now we found that that's not the case.
Parsons, of course, dissolved the board, ending the state's years of work towards Marcellus.
Are you actually being serious? Dog, look in front of your eyes. Like, it's not like I'm making this shit up. It's in front of you. Like, these are things that he has done. Every single thing that I have mentioned is factually accurate, okay?
Obtaining a hearing. After everything Marcellus had been through, for his case to once again be thrown into turmoil for things outside of his control seemed unbelievable. How did the scandal-plagued governor of Missouri's resignation essentially ruin Marcellus's chances at freedom? The funny thing about Parsons' tough-on-crime stance and these actions are that they only seem to apply to certain people in certain cases, further confounding how justice works within the state of Missouri. Parsons has been granting pardons and clemency at an exceptional rate, more than any governor of Missouri since the 1940s. But this has a specific political tint to it. Parsons.
It's just odd. Oh, he covers this. Never mind. Okay, it's just odd because he has given out a lot more pardons than most other governors. So why is it that in this circumstance, when there's a dude who is straight up innocent, he is refusing to pardon him?
Since clemency only comes for people like Mark and Patricia McCloskey, the couple who became famous for waving guns at Black Lives Matter protesters.
Missouri Governor Mike Parsons' office confirms his recent group of pardons and commutations include Mark and Patricia McCloskey. The St. Louis couple made national headlines last summer when they waved guns at demonstrators in their Central West End neighborhood.
As of August 2022, 90% of Parsons' pardons have been white petitioners, which when you look at the demographics of those incarcerated in the state seems nearly impossible. For those outside of Parsons' purview, the justice system seems...
Let's just hold on. I need you to understand one more time this fact. As of August 2022, 90% of the governor of Missouri, Parsons' pardons have been white petitioners.
Pardons have been white petitioners, which when you look at the demographics of those incarcerated in...
When you look at the demographics, white people comprise 55% of the Missouri jail population.
The state seems nearly impossible. For those outside of Parsons' purview, the justice system seems to lean its full weight on them. Parsons dissolved the board of inquiry looking into Marcellus's case and took no further action.
We filed a civil lawsuit saying we don't believe the governor has the authority to dissolve that board because he had to wait until they finished their work. Once they finished their work, he could do what he wanted with his clemency powers, but the order had already been there. Unfortunately, the Missouri Supreme Court disagreed with that and recently dismissed that civil case. And at that point, the Attorney General argued there was no other reason that an execution date shouldn't be set.
We're here now, and he's got a September execution.
This is the last part of the process. Here it is. Missouri Governor Mike Parsons has also said that he is potentially going to either release or shorten the prison sentence of the first Kansas City police officer ever convicted of killing a black man, signaling in recent comments his disapproval of the former detective's incarceration. A Republican in the final months of his time in office came close to a promising commutation or pardon for the KCPD detective Eric Canary in a radio interview last week. The comments are the furthest the governor, a former Polk County sheriff, has gone in telegraphing that he plans to take action in the case. There's not a week that goes by that somebody is not reaching out to me about that issue, and we're going to see what happens here before long. I'll leave it at that. But I don't like where he's at. I'll just say that. Canary was found guilty at a trial in Jackson County in 2021 on charges of second-degree involuntary manslaughter and armed criminal action in the killing of 26-year-old Cameron Lamb. Canary is currently serving a 6-year sentence after shooting Lamb as Lamb was backing up his pickup truck into his garage. Canary is believed to be in custody in an out-of-state prison after previously being held in state prison in Fulton. The Missouri Supreme Court has declined to overturn his convictions, leaving commutation and pardon by the governor as his only viable option to leave prison.
All of this speaks to how baffling the system in the state of Missouri is.
Missouri is one of the more difficult legal systems to navigate, in particular because of the opposition that every innocence case has faced.
Even when clear and convincing evidence emerges in a case, overturning a wrongful conviction here is an uphill battle.
I had a case, it wasn't a death row case, where the two witnesses who identified him as killing this guy both recanted their stories. We tried to get it back in front of the trial court here in Kansas City. The state opposed it, and the judge said, I can't hear this. Denied. And he's still in prison. We're still trying to get him out.
The appeals process in the United States is already a lengthy and complicated one, but in Missouri it is especially tough. There's strict filing deadlines, limited resources for post-conviction investigations, procedural barriers, restrictive criteria for DNA testing, and a high bar for introducing new evidence.
You can have a winning case and the court won't hear it because of a procedural default. And that happens time and time again. It's happened in Missouri numerous times. The guys have been executed without really any meaningful review of their cases because of that.
All of these hurdles have directly hindered Marcellus Williams' pursuit of the truth.
In Marcellus's case, we were not necessarily defaulted on a lot of stuff, but we were thwarted at every turn in trying to get court authorization to get access to evidence that could exonerate him.
Procedurally and legally, the state of Missouri is set up in a way that continually thwarts attempts to seek justice. But the power the Attorney General holds in the state further complicates things and leads to horrific situations that honestly shocked me the further I went down the rabbit hole. The Attorney General's office in the state of Missouri has fought tooth and nail against every appeal and every hearing in the last several decades.
When they fight it, they fight to just prevent a hearing from even happening. And that's what we see time and time again, this argument of finality over fairness. We just need to be done, and not that we just need to get it right. When you have an office that takes these really hardline approaches, there's not a lot of room for the facts or justice in those cracks in between.
Combined with the laws the state has enacted over these years, it has caused so many problems for those arguing wrongful convictions.
If you've got evidence that you got an unfair trial, or if you got or wrongfully convicted, it shouldn't matter that there's a procedural problem in the case. The court ought to hear it.
Just a few weeks ago, the AG's office blocked the release of Christopher Dunn, who had served 30 years for a crime he didn't commit.
Our top story, he was just minutes away from walking free. The 11th hour moved by the Missouri Supreme Court, halting the release of Christopher Dunn.
A circuit court judge overturned his conviction on the basis that both eyewitnesses had recanted their stories. Dunn was set to be released, only to have Missouri's current AG, Andrew Bailey, block it through the Missouri Supreme Court.
On Monday, a St. Louis Circuit Court judge overturned his conviction, but Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey appealed his release. On Wednesday, that same...
You have to understand, this is just straight white supremacy, right? If you're asking, what the fuck's going on? How do we get here? How does this happen? It is just pure, unfiltered, unvarnished white supremacy. That's it. What purpose, what kind of threat does this person constitute to society that he must remain behind bars? Okay? Even if he had actually even if he actually did the crime. At this point, like, even if he had actually done the crime, after decades spent in prison, like, what threat does this person have? The only reason why you are spending government resources on this shit is because you want to. I mean, it serves the exact same purpose as like putting statues of the Confederate generals right outside of the courthouse, okay? It is a constant reminder and a reaffirmation that this is a white supremacist criminal justice system and you should know your fucking place, okay? That's it. That's it.
A judge overruled Bailey, but just as Dunn was about to get out, the Missouri Supreme Court halted it per Bailey's request. Kira says she doesn't understand why AG Bailey is fighting it so hard.
All of this takes courage, and it's rare. And to see another part of the state try to slap that down and try to kill it, I just don't understand it.
This comes just a week after Bailey attempted the same thing with Sandra Hemme, the longest-held wrongly incarcerated woman known in the U.S. Hemme's conviction was overturned only to have her release blocked by Bailey. Eventually, he was overruled and she was set free. In the wake of it, her attorney Sean Bailey said it shouldn't be this hard to free an innocent person.
It's just going to show how bad the system needs to be reformed. It is broken.
Absolutely.
A judgment was made 35 days ago. She was innocent, but Attorney General Andrew Bailey fought her release in the courts until the judge ordered her release by 6 p.m., or he would hold the Attorney General in contempt.
Despite his conviction being overturned, Dunn remained behind bars because of the Attorney General's petitions.
We are overjoyed, and at the same time, we're also afraid to really exhale until Chris actually takes his first free steps.
The human cost of these systematic failures is staggering. Collectively, Missouri's exonerees have served hundreds of years behind bars for crimes they didn't commit. Families have been torn apart, lives derailed, and
why do AGs do this? Is it careerism? No, dude, it's white supremacy. That's it. It is white supremacy. That's it. There's nothing else.
The true perpetrators were left to commit further crimes.
She says no family should have to go through what Chris...
The criminal justice system is built on the foundation of white supremacist values. That woman is white. That doesn't change the reality that for all of the other non-white fucking victims of the criminal justice system, you have to uphold law and order in the same degree because you're going to kill a lot of black people that way.
Christopher's family went through yesterday. She says tonight they're waiting and trying to keep hope as this entire legal process continues to play out.
Marcellus' son knows all too well about this pain and the waiting, the keeping hope, the lengthy legal processes.
My dad in this up situation, I'm really got to be there for him. You know what I'm saying? You got to let your dad know you love him. You know, get somebody their roses while they still alive. These people want to put all the pressure. They make the visits uncomfortable. They make the lawyers run around in circles. You know what I'm saying? It's just too much.
Some studies indicate that 4 to 6% of the inmate population in America is actually innocent, which would mean that there could be hundreds more in Missouri behind bars for a crime they didn't commit. For a state that incarcerates its population at a rate higher than the national average and higher than most countries in the world, it needs to be sure it's getting these convictions right. Instead, it spent years railing against policies that would alleviate the...
Do you get it? Do you understand? Can you explain how it's white supremacy and how it applies here? America never abolished slavery. They just simply legalized it in the form. They just simply legalized it in the form of the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system that was the criminal justice system that's historically been used and will continue to be used against overwhelmingly black and brown population. And yes, white supremacy does end up sometimes directly harming, in many instances actually, directly harming white people as well. It's the same reason why white people are shocked when police brutalize them and they go, "What are you doing to me? I'm not black." But other white people look at that and go, "Look, sometimes it's going to happen," because ultimately that violent force is used against those we have decided need to be violently suppressed. It's kind of you know, it kind of comes with the territory. Some white people will also have to stay in prison, even if they are innocent, because ultimately we're using that structure to enslave black and brown people.
Problem and refuses to acknowledge any wrongdoing.
These people play games when they don't want to admit they wrongdoing. So it's the same story, new day, new book, you know, same shit, man.
The one strange thing Marcellus has on his side in this fight for innocence is doing it from death row.
Missouri is the only state in the country where if you can prove your innocence, you can get out of prison, but only if you were sentenced to death. So if you can prove your innocence and you were not sentenced to death, the courts essentially say we don't have any authority to do that.
In the 2016 ruling of Lincoln v. Cassidy by the Missouri Supreme Court, the court decided that freestanding claims of actual innocence, where a person asserts they are factually innocent of the crime for which they were convicted, even if there were no procedural errors in the trial, are only recognizable for individuals on death row. The decision effectively closed off a crucial avenue for potentially innocent prisoners serving non-death sentences to challenge their convictions based solely on new evidence of their innocence.
In 2016, the Court of Appeals in Missouri said it didn't matter essentially how strong the evidence of innocence was. The Missouri Supreme Court had only found innocence in a death penalty case, not in any other case, and so it did not have the power to overturn Rodney's conviction because he was not sentenced to death. That is still essentially the law today. Many individuals, myself included, have asked the Missouri Supreme Court to rehear this. They have declined to do so. And so what we see in cases like Rodney's or others in individuals is there's a very distinct partition between when we will hear evidence of innocence and when we won't.
The ruling in Lincoln v. Cassidy has had far-reaching consequences, as seen in cases like Christopher Dunn's, where compelling evidence of innocence exists but cannot be fully considered by the courts due to this precedent. For Marcellus, despite the fact he can present these freestanding claims of innocence, it has done little to help his case. It embodies every aspect of this broken justice system, and these failures very well could end in the execution of an innocent man. It's been 7 long years since the lab finally properly tested the DNA on the murder weapon found in Felicia Gale and proved it was not Marcellus Williams. It has been 7 long years since Marcellus Williams' lawyers have been seeking an evidentiary hearing to present this bombshell. And it has been 7 long years of the state of Missouri fighting this revelation like it has every other case.
Why not have the hearing, right? And the Attorney General's office has currently filed a motion to dismiss the prosecutor's
Dude, shut the
motion
fuck
to
up,
vacate,
dude. Shut the
arguing
fuck up.
that
Shut your stupid bitch ass up, dude. Okay? Shut up. Shut up. Jesus Christ, dude. What are you defending here? Like, what are you defending here? Please. What the fuck are you defending? Oh, the Attorney General of Missouri is not a fucking white supremacist. He's just a bad person. Like, what are you, right? Is he your fucking dad, dude? Is that what it is? What's going on? Like, what a fucking distinction without a difference. Oh my God. Please. Get a fucking grip. Anyway, top of the hour is, ad break is here, okay? I'm not even gonna fucking segue. I don't give a shit.
It's too late. Can't have a hearing.
Finally, after the execution date was set, the state decided it would allow an evidentiary hearing for the DNA evidence. Then, the AG, Andrew Bailey, filed a writ of probation to dismiss the hearing. The court rejected this, and the hearing will still proceed on August 21st, but not for lack of trying.
What's so disturbing about what's happening in Marcellus's case is that we have in January a prosecutor filing a motion to overturn his conviction on the basis of his innocence in January, and then just 6 months later, an execution date being set before a hearing on that motion has been held.
It's a very real possibility that because of the speed in which the courts work, that the results of the evidentiary hearing will not be known until after Marcellus Williams is executed on September 24th.
There's no coming back from an execution. And where there's DNA evidence and a prosecutor saying, I want a hearing on this DNA evidence because I believe this person is innocent, to not have that hearing, to just say it's too late, would really say something about what it means to try to seek justice in our system.
Beyond the convincing DNA evidence, the ineffective counsel, the contradicting eyewitnesses, something else has come to light. Notably, while Noah was making his documentary, a private investigator had spoken with Asaro before she had passed and said she had recanted her story, saying Marcellus had nothing to do with the murder.
somebody was following Laura Asaro before she passed. But apparently she said he didn't do it, he didn't do it.
It sounds to me like she said twice he didn't do it.
She died before they could get a sworn affidavit.
They tried to get an affidavit to her, and she passed before she could.
Even in spite of all that, all the other evidence in this case that points to Marcellus Williams' innocence should lead to his exoneration, or at least a new trial, but only time will tell if that happens. The governor of Missouri's AG will fight this case to the bitter end, and even if his conviction is overturned, they could block his release from prison, like they did Christopher Dunn and Sandra Hemme. Of course, on top of all this are the ethics of the death penalty, which are for another time.
Doesn't matter where someone stands on the death penalty here. If we want to have that system, there has to be the possibility for somebody to have their innocence heard before a step is taken that can never be undone.
This entire journey has disillusioned me on the justice system's approach to wrongful convictions, and even more so on Missouri's fight for finality over fairness. But it has also taught me that if a case gets enough attention, it very well could mean life or death for the person at the center.
He a good man, he an honorable man, and he an innocent man. So that's that.
Thanks again, Delete Me, for making this video possible. I just wanted to also say thanks to Noah and his crew and all the work they did. If you want to know how to get involved, people to donate to, petitions to sign, congressmen to annoy, I've included some links down below.
This was this guy did phenomenal work, Corey Popp. I don't know what his other I don't know what his other videos look like. I guess he's made 3. The execution will happen in an hour. Oh yeah, if you go to faxzero.com, you can send a fax to the office of the governor of Missouri. Many people are doing that, but I think that this is beyond like calls for help. Here.
I think our criminal justice system is working as intended. It is only broken to the extent that our society is broken. If your intention is to,
Ta-Nehisi Coates also had, his voicemail is full. Calling his office will not do anything. His voicemail, his voicemail inbox has been full for days.
Jail massive numbers of people. If you believe that prison is an effective means of dealing with the myriad social needs of the African American community, then it's pretty effective. In fact, there's a long history in this country of dealing with problems in the African American community through criminal justice system, criminalizing social problems in a way that we don't do in other communities. For instance, if you looked at the research, you would find that somewhere around 60 to 70% of the people in prisons and in jails are suffering some sort of mental health problem. Upwards of 50%, go in there dealing with some sort of chemical dependency. Viewed from another lens, these are public health problems. One could look at, the massive number of African American men who are out of work, and the intersection between that and prison. Or one could look at where prisons are located. And, you would find that a lot of times prisons are located in rural regions, where all other industries effectively shut down. And you might think of that as actually an employment problem and not a criminal justice problem. The enduring view of African Americans in this country is as a race of people who are prone to criminality. I mean, literally, we have the notion of black people as, criminals written into our Constitution. We have a fugitive slave clause, which effectively makes all the things that are normal for any other American in that period illegal for black people. To pursue your own freedom was illegal. Slavery, was enforced by the criminal justice system, the slave laws. It made, very, very ordinary things like learning to read effectively a criminal act. Frederick Douglass is an escaped slave. He's a criminal. He's stolen his body, as he says in one of his speeches. Harriet Tubman, is running a massive criminal conspiracy, stealing people. I know we all love Martin Luther King today, but in his time, by, the highest powers in the American justice system, Martin Luther King was viewed as a criminal, by J. Edgar Hoover. Arguably, perhaps by, the Kennedy administration and the Johnson administration. I say that because they signed off on the bugging, of his home and, wherever he was. The lens of criminal justice is the way this country has traditionally regarded black people. I don't know that anything is broken at all. The deeper question is, are we okay with something on the order of 4,000 African-American males per 100,000 being in jail? Are we okay with that? Are we okay with, there being a 1 in 3 chance for every, African American male born in this generation of eventually doing some sort of time in prisons and in jails? Are we all right with that? And that goes to the deeper question of, are we all right with black people in the position that they are in our society? Or do we have some sort of, long-term commitment to justice?
The governor won't do anything because he is racist. Okay, it's that simple. And neither would the Supreme Court didn't do anything because they are racist too. Marcellus Williams, yes, I covered it already earlier for an hour plus, and I told you already that it will most likely go through. The Supreme Court did not stop it, and the governor also refused to stop it. Marcel Williams' last statements reads, "All praise be to Allah in every situation." These were his last words. Marcellus Williams was an innocent man, and the state knew of his innocence. The prosecutor's office maintained his innocence after the court proceedings. Jurors came out and said that they made the wrong decision. DNA evidence exonerated him. And in spite of the critical amount of people petitioning the governor's office to put a stay on the execution, the governor yesterday said that he would not do so. In the last moments, they went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also said that they would not stop the execution. Yes, he was also pro-Palestine as well. The governor has blood on his hands now. I mean, the governor has had blood on his hands. What's their reasoning? Because they're fucking racist, okay? That's it. The American criminal justice system is one that deliberately churns out the exact same results that America had under chattel slavery. As a matter of fact, the 13th Amendment, which is supposed to abolish slavery, actually simply codifies it and turns it into a mechanism of the state. A mechanism that we use to this day, even beyond the heinous nature of the private for-profit prison system, which is unimaginably cruel. Like, it's a ridiculous statement. We have full-blown slavery as a method of punishment in this country. Consistently underserved the black population, refused to allow them to participate in the regular economic improvement that everyone else gets to participate in, leave their communities, segregate their communities and leave those segregated communities underserved, and then criminalize their existence every step of the way, put them in the system early on as children, okay? And then you can enslave them in the exact same way that this country once famously, openly, and legally did. That's it. I think that is the real reason why a lot of the draconian attitudes that people demonstrate, when talking about like crime and punishment, I think it stems from like a defense of the white supremacist nature of the criminal justice system. And black people do this too. And white people who think they are anti-racist do this too. There are plenty of progressive people who do this. They defend capital punishment. They defend the gruesome ways in which we seek out vengeance against those who have done wrong. And I think the actual purpose of that draconian culture is to justify a white supremacist institution like our criminal justice system. Okay? And people who otherwise are anti-white supremacy but are pro-draconian punishments are actually simply reasserting that position. They're simply defending that position without even recognizing it, without seeing the contradiction in saying that you are an anti-racist. Capital punishment is not really vengeance. It absolutely is. It is a barbaric method of vengeance. How do we know he's innocent? I mean, dude, come on, man. Come on, dude. Shut the fuck up. Oh my God. Like, the only thing tying him to the crime was two people that wanted both one person that wanted leniency and had every reason to lie, and another person that wanted $10,000 in rewards. They openly fucking said that, by the way. There was no evidence. There was only evidence that, like, even if he wasn't 100% guilty, even if he was like 90% guilty, it still means that the state should not be able to execute him. But in this circumstance, we know he was 100% innocent, and you're still trying to fucking defend it. Because you're a giant piece of shit, dude. You are a powerless fucking loser, and the only thing that makes you feel like you have something in your life is when you are cruel to others. When the state enforces its unjust ways and you defend it, it makes you feel powerful, as though you have an ownership stake in this. You don't. You are nothing. You're a fucking peon, and you feel that every day in your life. You feel that in this very moment when you bootlick that state. It is from your powerlessness that comes this attitude, this need to feel powerful. I don't have any power, but at least someone has it worse than me. That's it. That's the only reason why dumb fucks with globe emojis in their fucking descriptions like salivate at the prospect of bombing Yemen, okay? Oh, they gonna learn today why we don't have healthcare. It's like, dude, you literally just admitted you don't have healthcare. You're like, this state that you are defending is actively killing you, okay? It openly demonstrates every single day that it does not have your best interest at heart, and you are such a cucked fucking loser that you look to people who are on the receiving end of American imperialism getting bombed mercilessly once again when being bombed by the vassals of said imperial state is all they've known their whole lives, and you say, hey, at least I'm not in Yemen. Tell the lowest white man that he is higher than the highest black man, and you can run his pockets and rob him blind. No, it wasn't Malcolm X that said that. It was LBJ. As a leftist, how do you constantly read things like this and still look for a hopeful future? I try every day, but it gets harder. It's fine. He'll even empty his pockets for you. Exactly. Listen, things are always awful, and things will remain awful. What you can focus on is marginal changes that you can make in your life and in the lives of others around you, and always keep putting your best foot forward. That's it. Okay? Look at human history. Things have always gotten better slowly. Not necessarily. They haven't gotten better on their own. They've gotten better because there are people like yourselves out there who, in spite of everything in society telling you that shit's never going to get better and everything is awful and will forever be awful, people still fight. People still fight for these causes. People still fight for what is right. Yes, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. That's why I keep repeating the same talking points forever. One, because I'm a stubborn piece of shit. And two, because I know that if I can change the mind of one person, or two people, or 10 people, or 1,000 people, and then they go around and change the minds of others, then I've done my job. So for every fucking uncharitable dipshit who comes in here to fling shit in the face of like horrifying realities of American governance, of American domination, whether it be a justification for the white supremacist nature of our criminal justice system, in an instance where there is like an abject horror, a genuinely cruel moment that they are still defending, okay? I know that my statements will reach at least one person. I know that my statements will change the minds of at least one person, change the heart of at least one person, okay? And if I can make someone be marginally less reactionary on any number of issues I speak to, then I've done my job. Anyway, once again, I'm going to repeat this statement that I say all the time whenever we talk about criminal justice reform. And leftists start chirping at me and say, no, but we need to execute this person. We need to execute that person. Okay, what if it was your sister or your mother that was horrifically stabbed? Bet you'd sing a different tune then. Well, there's a reason why you don't sit on the fucking jury if you are directly involved with the crime, you know? And there's a good reason for it. Okay? Because when you're robbing someone of their freedom, that examination must be unemotional, okay? It must be cold and calculated. And if you do not have the capacity to demonstrate rational behavior in that circumstance for understandable reasons, like if you are the family members of the victim, then yes, of course, it should be left up to a jury of your peers. In spite of the fucking loopholes that exist that try to stack the deck against those who have been declared branded criminals. There are obviously material inequalities at play here. There's mental health complications. There's the color of your skin and attitudes towards certain races. But ultimately, justice is not about vengeance, okay? Justice is not about vengeance. It's not about how you feel in that moment. It's about making sure that there are people who will never do that are people that have done heinous, horrific wrongs that can be rehabilitated and reintegrated into society adequately, okay? And in many instances, like the one that we just saw with Marcellus Williams, the injustice is often issued by the state when they execute a man who was innocent, who never committed a crime, and they just did it anyway.